Hi, my name is Eleanor Tatum, and I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of the New York Amsterdam News. The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the Local Media Association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work in chronicling the life of Black New Yorkers, and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund today. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Again, that is givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Thank you and stay safe.
It's Thursday, June 6th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. On this week's episode, my guest is Amsterdam News senior writer Herb Boyd. He's going to be speaking with me about the recent protests after the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Well, protests continue across the nation and around the world during the aftermath of the police killing of Black unarmed George Floyd in Minneapolis. On May 25th, Floyd was killed by white police officer Derek Chauvin, who put his knee on Floyd's neck for over 8 minutes before Floyd died. The incident was caught on cell phone video. Chauvin has since been fired, arrested, and charged with second-degree murder. 3 other officers on the scene were also fired and arrested. Thousands of people in cities around the world have been protesting Floyd's killing and police brutality for the past several days. Memorial services for Floyd were held on Thursday in Brooklyn and in Minneapolis. Let me welcome you to this episode of our podcast, and I'm so glad that we're going to be talking with senior writer Herb Boyd on this episode about this very issue that has ignited an overdue conversation about policing and racism in this country. You know, I've been at the New York Amsterdam News for over 13 years, and this just keeps happening, and you have to wonder, when will it end? And we're definitely going to talk with Herb about what he thinks what the solution is. Well, it is Thursday, and the paper did come out, and I have several stories that I want to go over with you. First, our front page story that we have: People Power, protests sparked across America for George Floyd, which is our continuing coverage of the recent protest demonstrations that have been taking place around the city. Our editor, Nalba Rende, actually had the chance to speak with the mother and sister of Eric Garner, who was killed by police in 2014 in Staten Island via a chokehold, a similar situation that happened to George Floyd. We talked to them about what they think about the current situation and what their plans are. We also have a story about emergency food programs needed for seniors during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's about how many seniors in the community are still struggling to get food that they need as this pandemic continues. City Comptroller Scott Stringer and Public Advocate Jemani Williams actually wrote a letter to COVID-19 food czar and Department of Sanitation Commissioner Catherine Garcia about that issue. And lastly, in our arts and entertainment section, we actually have a story about the recent launch of a new online education initiative by filmmaker Ava DuVernay. The initiative is called Array, which includes social impact learning guides for her films and television series. You can read all those stories and more in the newspaper. All we ask is that you go pick it up safely. You can also read them online at amsterdamnews.com. Well, my guest this week is author, educator, and award-winning New York Amsterdam News journalist Herb Boyd. He's with me to discuss the police killing of George Floyd and the protests taking place across the nation. Welcome to the podcast, Herb. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing okay. It's a lot going on, and I'm sure you're just like me. You're watching the news and seeing everything that's going on and saying to yourself, you know, here we go again. But what are your feelings about what's going on here?
Not only watching it, Josh, but we have the responsibility of really observing and reporting all this stuff.
Absolutely.
And it's, of course, nothing new for us, because as journalists out there on the beat, we get this hit at us all the time. We have to quickly respond to this. But, you know, being a historian at the same time, you know, it's easy for me to put some of this stuff into context, because the more things change, the more they remain the same.
Right.
And here we go again. And one of the things so disturbing about this situation is that it comes at a time when we have a tremendous crisis in this country, a kind of health crisis, a situation with the coronavirus pandemic, to say nothing, the spiraling unemployment that's going on. So it's almost like, you know, a triple whammy. We hit with this triple whammy of a situation where we can't You turn one way, you met with unemployment situations, stores closed, you can't move around, the community's jammed up, with a virus, and then you met with the hostility coming from our so-called men in blue, who we employ to protect and rescue us from danger, and they end up being the one that imperil us. So it's just a terrible irony, a tragic irony with the situation with George Floyd out in Minneapolis. I just finished watching. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the memorial service for him out in Minneapolis.
I did see a few minutes of it. Yeah, I did see. And then also, of course, Nayaba Rinde, our editor, she's out in Brooklyn. She was out there taking pictures, and she actually emailed them to me. We're going to be putting those photos actually on our social media. They should be there, so please check them out. But I just think of all the things that are going on. Again, we had a pandemic that's still going on, like you said, and now we have this situation involving George Floyd and the aftermath. And, I was just so not surprised, but just interesting in the fact that this is a global demonstration that's going on right now for George Floyd. People are literally saying enough is enough. And I know that the video, of course, is something that gave a lot of people a wake-up call who might not have thought that we didn't have it that bad, but we actually do. And so what's your take on the reaction? Because I'm seeing a lot of diversity in these marches and in these protests. That's one thing my mother, I had a conversation with her, she was saying, is that this is a very diverse reaction to what we're seeing.
And it has global implications. I was just checking this morning's paper and see just how many major cities around the world in which many of these cities are faced with similar situations in terms of how they treat people of color. Mm-hmm. So this becomes symptomatic or symbolic of some of the concerns they have, be it in London or whether you're talking about in Brazil. Wherever you look, you have a situation where the police forces, the brutality dispensed by the police, mm-hmm. is almost like a situation. So they are beginning to really relate, and this reminds them again of what's happening right in their own backyards, what's happening on their own streets, mm-hmm. in terms of what they have to do as people are calling for some kind of reform. And others are asking for even more dramatic changes, in how we're policed in this country. Mm-hmm. And people feel that, all the rioting and destruction, does that really improve the situation?
Right,
of course
exactly.
Not.
Yeah.
And the urgency of anger that these people are expressing, because, in one way, it's nothing new. We just recently had the incident, with Ahmaud Arbery. Say nothing of Breonna Taylor. So they usually come one after another. It's almost like serial items of tragedy, mm-hmm. that we get coming from law enforcement agencies and African American people. Many of them unarmed, innocent people who suddenly become casualties and victims of police overkill, overzealousness.
Right. And I know that you are, of course, doing our Trump watch for the Amsterdam News, and always giving your opinion on what's going on with how the president is handling this situation. And this, we've had situations like this since he's been in office, but they've happened before. And instead of bringing the country together, obviously he's being criticized for fanning the flames further. We had the lootings and shootings, and then we had the insult on Twitter yesterday of Obama, former President Barack Obama, who did that live stream town hall meeting, the virtual town hall meeting with several people about policing in this country. I know you wrote something about it this week in the paper. You can see it online, but also I just want you to share your opinions and thoughts on how the President Donald Trump is handling this situation.
Badly, and one awfully bad. I mean, this is just an absolute authoritarian dictator, fascistic tending so-called leader. I call him the incompetent. He's an incompetent incumbent, and we have something about him out of office. He's done enough. I mean, anyone at this point not understanding what he represents. He's a toxic flamethrower to begin with.
Yes.
To get back to the current question, Josh. And his response to that, he has no empathy, no sympathy, no passion, no compassion whatsoever for what's happening in this country. I mean, it's just a total disregard of democracy. Our democratic is squelched, to say nothing of constitutional rights, violated, abandoned, abrogated. He's done all of that just consistently. Each tweet that comes from him is like almost like, he's throwing another Molotov cocktail on us.
Right.
Country. You know what he talks about me and talks about you in terms of the press being, the media being the enemy of the people. I mean, that alone should be enough to incriminate this individual, to alert all but his political base. And I'm glad to see that a number of these Republican leaders now are beginning to contend with his position.
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
Their defense, Mark Esper, saying, no. He's talking about militarizing this whole movement against the protesters. Well, that's nothing but a recipe for catastrophe. That's all that. So we have to say something. I'm glad that some people are standing up. I don't know. The Cadman, I heard the Cadman Palace Plaza thing.
Yes.
Bad. De Blasio, they booed him off the stage.
I did see that. Before we started this interview, I did look at what was going on with that to kind of, get an idea. And I did see that he was booed, in Brooklyn at the park. And so that's an interesting dynamic, and now we've talked about, I'm glad you bring de Blasio up because we are, the protests are happening all over the country. We've been seeing them here in New York City. Obviously the mayor sets the tone for the city. What do you think of Mayor de Blasio's performance, during this time, because we've seen so much. We've seen the looting. We've seen some of the rioting. It's uprising. I get that. Here's the thing. Let me just say this, and I say this all the time. I don't condone the looting. I don't condone the violence. I don't condone anybody hurt. I'm totally for peaceful protesting. However, I understand why some people are doing that. I don't condone it, but I understand why, because people are angry. They're upset. The looting thing, that's whatever. I'm not even going to get on that. But, the anger, the rioting, I understand. I understand why, because, one of the things I was telling my mother is that here in New York City, and even all across the country, not even just in New York, there are young people, young black men, young people who are constantly having confrontations with the police on a regular basis and they don't need to. And whether they're doing something or not, that's whatever. But, there are young black boys, young black teenagers in the city who are constantly being harassed by the police and they just can't take it anymore. And so I understand why a lot of people are upset. But what's your take on how the mayor is handling that and this whole situation?
Well, first of all, he needs to understand exactly where the anger is coming from, and it's an accumulation. I mean, the latest incident is no more than a tinderbox. I mean, it's been George Floyd's death and the way he died. Is what ignited a tinderbox, an accumulation of inequality, discrimination, racism, bigotry, prejudice, the absolute assault, on people of color in America. So that's all that is. Understand exactly where that anger is coming from. And then, first of all, reach out with some understanding of empathy and compassion for that. And then comes your action. Well, the whole deployment of the nearly 40,000 police officers we have in this community, it wasn't very well done.
Right.
Where in some cities, like you check out what happened in Los Angeles, they quickly, my own experiences of going through a rebellion in Detroit in 1967, in which the police quickly cordoned off, the downtown Detroit. We were not going to get down there and tear up them stores, those high upscale stores. We were not going to get to them. However, if you block them off, then you turn up the forces of revolt against their own community. I watched, officers go up gas stations and mom and pop stores destroyed right in our own neighborhood.
Right.
So, not a good lesson. But we have to learn from history. I mean, it sometimes can be a very, very cruel and brutal teacher. But we got to pay attention to those things. And what did it mean? And what did we get it? What did we get out of it? We got a lot out of the protest marches during the civil rights period, but those were mostly nonviolent. There was pressure being put on elected officials in our government. They were saying something those kind of disparities we face as a people of color in this country.
Right, right.
So it was tearing our community down and burning up our own neighborhoods. That's not effective at all.
No,
that's counterproductive.
Absolutely. And I live here in the Bronx, and I live not far from Fordham Road, where the other night it was really bad, and I haven't even, since that's happened, I haven't even been out to see any of the damage, and I just thought it was so heartbreaking that, there's a computer store that I actually use around the corner from me, and, sadly they were broken into. There are these mom and pop shop pharmacies. There was one in particular, a pharmacy that a lot of people in the community used to get their, medications and things, and that place was completely, wrecked and messed up, and we saw the videos, and it's horrible. But because I do believe that there are some people out there who are misusing the situation, to commit crimes and get things. So I can't discount and not say that because it's true, unfortunately. But one of the things I do want to, speaking of the protesting and all this other stuff, one of the things I do want to ask you is, there have been a lot of accusations of people saying that there are a lot of outsiders who are coming in. I think Mayor de Blasio has said that. A lot of people are saying that, we're seeing license plates from people all around the country who are causing a little bit of mayhem here in the city. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I've never actually heard of that happening here before, but what do you think about that?
That's inevitable. That's what you might call goes with the territory. There's always opportunists out there looking to take advantage of chaos. And that's what they do. I mean, you see people coming in, with crowbars and hammers. They have nothing but menace and destruction on their mind. And that's certainly, but it was good to see a lot of young people who were particularly here in New York City, who were lining up and locking arms in front of various property, making sure people didn't destroy it. So that was a good sign that you had some level-headed people out there trying to protect, what the police was not doing. So some of the cops just stepped out of the way. And it proved to be somewhat effective, because that means that instead of interacting with that crowd, go and line up and protect the property. That's all you have to do. You don't have to be kind of beating people back, tear gassing them and pepper spraying and rubber bullets and stuff like that. Just get back and protect the property. When they see you lined up there, they're not going to try to breach that wall there. But if you're trying to contain them, as they did down in Washington, D.C., you're going to get some reaction from the people. That's when they start hurling all kind of things. The bottles were thrown, bricks were thrown, people were throwing the canisters of tear gas right back at the cops. So you have a situation that's just totally out of hand. It was totally destructive. I don't know what's going to come out of this. Or hundreds and hundreds of people have been arrested. What they'll get out of this, what they learn from this, and the looting that went on, that was absolutely uncalled for. But it's almost inevitable. When you have a situation where it's out-and-out revolt and tumult, you have individuals who are lurking on the fringes, looking for an opportunity to run into one of those stores and grab off some of their goods. So at the same time, it's good to know there's a few, really quick-thinking and courageous people, in fact, jump in front of those folks who have nothing but, destruction and damage and looting on their minds.
Absolutely.
It's not at all productive, Josh.
Yeah. It's not. And so one of the things I was, you're talking about the police and their reaction. We've seen this various videos, and my thinking is like, these protests and demonstrations are happening to combat police brutality, excessive force by police, but yet we're still seeing videos of, there was one video I saw where there was a young black guy, he had his hands up and a mask on, and the police officer ripped off the mask and sprayed his face with pepper spray. Another situation where a young woman was walking and a police officer just slammed her down, and I think she was hurt very badly. And so it's situations like that we're seeing, and it's just like, how is this supposed to help when it's, not getting better or worse, but, or rather it's getting worse because we're seeing these visuals, almost every day. And, but I guess the one question that I have for you, because you've seen what's happened, a lot of this is being compared, it's being compared as called that 2020 is going to be a long, hot summer, similar to the protests that happened in Newark in 1967 and with Martin Luther King in 1968. Are we going to be in this 2020 long, hot summer similar to those ones that we saw back in the 60s and even in Watts and other places? What's your reaction to that? What do you think?
It seems like we're already in it.
I think we are.
In other words, at the beginning, we seem to have some incipient precipitation of that right now, and for different reasons, and at the same time, some of the same reasons, because those long hot summers had much to do with the very oppressive nature of the system. There's still that systemic racism that was a part of the 60s. It hasn't gone away. It metastasized more than anything. It may have been in remission. So racism in remission is not racism removed. So it pops up again, and all you need is this one incident. And that's what happened with the George Floyd, although you have to combine that with the Aubrey thing down in Georgia as well as Breonna Taylor out in
Exactly.
Louisville.
It just all kind of came at once. First it was Ahmaud Aubrey, then Breonna, and now we have this, and just back to back. So yeah, a lot. When it rains, it pours. Unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. And so what happens? This is an accumulative thing, and after a while, folks just throw their hands up, and make them want to holler and do some other kind of things in terms of retribution and getting back at. And that's the only way people can fight back. Sometimes is to go ahead and. The hatred and the anger and the spew, because they cannot sometimes get to the actual perpetrators of this. So sometimes they take it out on their own communities, so that's the kind of outrage, that kind of upheaval, civic disturbances that have been historically a part of this country. I mean, there seems to be no sort of cease in that because the same elements that provoked and brought about it this time did it in the past. So you have like half his prologue, Josh. Half his prologue.
Mm-hmm. So Herb, what is the solution here? A lot of people are looking for answers. We keep seeing this happening over and over again. How can we stop this from happening?
Hey, Josh, that's a really a difficult question. If I had the answer to that, I'd bottle it and go to the bank.
Right.
One of the things about this obvious solution, or at least a step in that direction, of course, is to have these cops convicted.
Yes.
Because, even the autopsy have determined that these were homicides. They're not impervious. They should not be able to kill with impunity. Some measure of justice has to be meted out. And I think that would go a long way in satisfying and stifling the potential outbursts of outrage and anger, because you can bet your bottom dollar that people are going to hit the street again. And of course, you have this here recurrence of violence, a recurrence of property destruction, recurrence of people being arrested and possibly killed by the cops, because we've already had some incidents in which people have either been severely injured, arrested, or killed.
Mm-hmm.
Look at people killed down in Louisville, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So the recipe, I think part of the answer, you've arrested these cops, you've charged them, they'll be tried, can they be convicted? And then what's going to be the sentence as a result of that?
Mm-hmm.
Those go a long way in satisfying some of the outrage and anger that historically we faced in this country. Let's make those moves and see if that will hold down the discontent, this outbursts of anger and outrage we have in the society.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that a conviction and a just sentence would speak volumes and send a very powerful message. Well, listen, thank you so much, Herb, for coming on to talk about this. And as this story moves forward, we definitely will have you back to talk about this in the future. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. Thank you, Josh.
That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NYAmNews. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Eleanor Tatum, and I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of the New York Amsterdam News. The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the Local Media Association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work in chronicling the life of Black New Yorkers, and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund today. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Again, that is GIVEBUTTER.com/Amsterdam News. Thank you and stay safe.